welcome to the Entrepreneur's Ethic podcast. We are joined today by Brady Sidwell, an old friend. Thank you for being with us, Brady.
Yeah, great to be here, Kevin. Thank you.
Brady is an entrepreneur, commodity trader, and investor from Enid, Oklahoma. Sidwell Enterprises is an agricultural conglomerate with its parts including Sidwell Distribution, Chisholm Trail Milling, 81 Feed and Seed, Enterprise Grain, Sidwell Farms, Sidwell Strategies, Sidwell Seed, and Enid Brewing Company. Quite a list, Brady, and we'll learn more about some of those different parts.
Yeah.
Brady is also a limited partner and member of the advisory board of Germinate Ventures, a food tech venture capital firm based out of Chicago, and he serves on the board of directors of the Federal Reserve Bank of Kansas City's Oklahoma City branch. Prior to becoming an entrepreneurial business owner, Brady was vice president of global strategy, mergers and acquisitions for OSI Group. At OSI, he also served as vice president of corporate strategy and business development for the Asia Pacific, Middle East, and Africa, based in Hong Kong, which is about the time, Brady, we met some years ago.
Mhm.
Before joining OSI, Brady was head of food and agricultural research at Rabobank in Asia. And Brady is a proud alum of Oklahoma State University. We have watched one Oklahoma State University, Iowa State University football game together, to which your Cowboys ruined a
Yes.
homecoming football part of
I
part of
know.
the homecoming
We
weekend, at least.
and you were as surprised as we were, I think so.
So, describe Sidwell Enterprises and its various parts. What's the tie that binds? There's a lot of parts to what you're doing, and how did each opportunity for the different parts kind of manifest themselves?
Yeah, thank you, Kevin, and it's good to be reconnected here again. And entrepreneurship you've long been working on, and it's before we met, I wasn't in this stage yet, but am now, and it's been great to keep in contact. And entrepreneurship, I feel, and I've been saying a lot recently, is my thought is it's really the answer to rural development and bringing businesses back to our rural communities. So I'm very passionate about that, as are most entrepreneurs and the things that they're doing. And my story back here is kind of no different. When I was in Asia working at OSI and Rabobank, I spent a lot of time in the supply chain. And my dad had passed away, and then I moved to Chicago and worked with OSI for another couple years, and then eventually came back to the farm. Well, back to the farm, and that's been 10 years ago now. So I've got kind of a decade of mistakes and experiences to reflect on, and this is a good opportunity to be able to do that.
There's that
Um,
old thing about it takes 10 years, right?
yeah, I think I started and thought it was three, but then it
Ah,
was five, then it was seven, and and then you just keep going until it works, I guess. But um, So, I work a lot in supply chain, and Sidwell Enterprises is developed, over those 10 years with different businesses coming along year after year. And it wasn't necessarily just part of a grand plan. It was part of what I saw are gaps in the supply chain, summarized really of connecting consumer producers and consumers. And you think of developing markets like in Asia versus a developed economy like in the US, and you think that there's no gaps in the supply chain in the United States. And what I learned and saw and became very passionate about was when it comes to local supply chain of being able to take a local product and turn it into a consumer product in the same vicinity without it being shipped, far off overseas or even to other states for processing it by large corporations into an ingredient that then goes to a food company in another part of the area, is being able to do more of that entire ecosystem and supply chain locally. That in fact there are a lot of gaps. In that we've seen so much consolidation in agriculture. There's never been a time that that conversation's not been more prevalent than now when it comes to the concentration in beef packing and fertilizer and chemicals and even seed. And when I came back at a ground level to our small farm, having global experience and a lot of experience in the supply chain, and also just observing consumer trends of wanting to eat things local and wanting to eat things a little more wholesome with less additives and all the things now that this Maha movement, I feel like everyone's appreciating, not as a political part, but just as, we are what we eat, truly, and food is health. And so so it's really that bridge with a local reality that producers in the commodity markets, it's extremely hard to compete. Things we export, we can't take for granted because those markets get complicated. We have tariffs now and trade disputes, but even all of that aside, in the commodity world, it's commodity. I mean, you got to be the least cost producer. And Brazil continues to take advantage of their scale and low cost of labor and just mass geography to be able to dominate in the export market and for the things that most of U.S. agriculture is producing at a large scale that we're both producing the same thing. And it's so, I observe that farmers are looking for some diversification, some rotation, different crops that we're not going head to head and depending on the export market and trying to compete with Brazil and developing these supply chains. So, we started with our grain elevator operation that's called Enterprise Grain Company, just north of Enid, Oklahoma. It's an old concrete elevator, and there's a seed facility there. And my dad actually had a seed wheat business, and he was a doctor of agronomy and worked on plant breeding when he was in school, and worked for some seed companies after that. And then they eventually kind of moved back where I'm from, Goldtree, and not far from where they grew up to be the superintendent at the Oklahoma State Research Station. So I grew up in all of the kind of the genetic side of plant breeding. Thought I wanted to do that in school, but then kind of took more of a business ag economics route. Went to Asia, of course, came back, and all that's important because it determines really how I think, and then these businesses that I put into place of more post farm. So once we have the product or determining what we need to grow, you have to have a delivery point, especially if you're trying to do something different and specialized. So that's the reason I started Enterprise Grain. And we handle commodities, but my real passion has been to be able to find these crops that can connect to become ingredients for producers, both domestic as well as export from the U.S., but that we can grow in our rotation with commodity crops that have higher margin opportunities that are wholesome products and essentially developing a specialized supply chain for things that are relevant that we can grow here and that consumers want. So, on the supply chain piece, there's enterprise grain. We have our seed business because that's really the first step where we supply the seed to the farmers. And in the specialty crop world, in particular, like that's a key thing. You've got to provide them the seed and tell them what to grow and how to grow it. And well, they know how to grow it, but just some of the agronomic features and harvest uh, advice and those things.
So if I remember right, you were buying wheat, an important
Mhm.
local crop and a commodity crop, but you were buying
Yep.
it based upon protein.
Yes,
But then
and
that's informing your seed recommendations anyway, but
correct.
it's coming from non-wheat country, it was an education for me. Like, why isn't this happening in this
Right,
industry?
and sometimes that's the most interesting thing about some innovations is or programming, I guess, is that and there's always a reason. Be it the companies that are currently trading it or however. But I came back as trying to figure out how we could again be specialized and not just be a quantity operator because that's you can't do that in the grain business, but a quality operator I could be, and especially given that we were looking downstream. Eventually going downstream. I mean, at first we had the seed business and our elevator, but yeah, the biggest deal was on the wheat side was yeah, we were taking hard red winter wheat that everybody's growing around here, but we began to test the protein. And protein or what flour mills check is the first proxy and the main proxy actually of a lot of other things that are quality factors for, the milling side of things. So we started checking the protein, but and that's been done a lot, but we checked the protein. The difference was we told the farmer what their protein was and we wrote it on their ticket. And you know, it the machines are expensive, I'll put it that way, but with some investment, of a $30,000 protein machine, and I'm sure with AI and everything, this stuff is going to get a lot cheaper quick. But, at the time, yeah, it was a $30,000 machine, and I mean, and still is, but it does it quick. I mean, we had a lot of competitors say, well, telling their farmers, oh, you can't do that because you'll have to sit on the scale too long waiting. Well, it's as quick as testing the moisture and the test weight. So we did that. We wrote it on their ticket. And when there was a protein premium in the market for higher pro, we would pay the farmer an additional premium. And so that caught wind very quickly. Probably didn't make, me much of a welcome competitor, to those that are around us, but we felt it was right. We felt like if we are shipping it out and getting paid by the flour mill on those premiums, then we should mimic that with our farmers and pay them a premium. And then the whole thing is we should hopefully get more grain, and not only grain but high quality grain, and hopefully then downstream the flour mills begin to think of our location as a high quality business. And so
So
and it's
everybody
probably
can get paid more.
that's right. And that's probably a theme of everything that we're doing is quality, not quantity. And it varies in different stages, down all the way to making beer from local grain, making fresh flour from local grain. But where it started really was just having a delivery point and thinking differently about how we could take a commodity crop and segment it into really become a little bit more of a specialty, and take away that disadvantage that we had of not being able to be a quantity operator, but we could be a quality one.
Was there a magic moment in watching farmer behavior? Was it that when they were getting paid premiums when their buddies weren't, so they had coffee shop bragging rights? Or was it when they started coming to you saying, I mean, there's weather can affect protein. Correct me when
Right.
I'm wrong. But
Yep.
anyway, lots of circumstances can, but certainly I would think seed selection and
Yes.
agronomic management, which can as well. And so I would,
Yeah.
do they start to ask questions about those things as well?
Yeah, 100%. And that's the kind of conversation we wanted to have with our producers, not just at harvest time, oh, what is your basis? And going back and forth, but asking better questions, asking them in advance of the next season's planting, and then, we can have a much more informed conversation about things that we have the answer to. Farmers are economists, right? I mean, if you pay them more to do something, they're going to do more of it, and that was the basic philosophy that we used, is to say, hey, if we, are trying to incentivize protein, they're going to produce more protein, and that's higher quality. But then the question, of course, they ask themselves, how do I produce more protein? So most definitely, and now I mean, I feel that even beyond our immediate area, but it's changed the entire conversation about how wheat is bought, traded, seed wheat is planted, or variety selection, because people are like, oh, well, that also has a higher protein content. I mean, and before we were back here in that kind of time when I did that in 2017, it was a year after I got back, because I could quickly tell that that was a key thing in the market to be a differentiator. And since that time, I mean, now everybody talks about, does this variety have good protein? It's actually on the variety sheets now of companies that are selling those genetics. They're breeding it for it. They're talking about it. Weather and stress, right? Or stress from weather is a key, just like grapes and alcohol content. But it's also nitrogen. And I think that's one of the things that more recently has been realized too, is that even if you have really good weather, but you just put more nitrogen on, you create more protein. So there's agronomic factors, there's seed selection, and given that we're in that business, we're again trying to align those products with the questions that people are answering based on the incentives they're able to be paid.
Well, to maybe stay zoomed in on wheat is one of the supply chains. This has been some years ago, and you might be more familiar with it, but I started to read like Dr. Mark Hyman
Hmm.
writing about food and all kinds of things. But one of the sort of rabbit holes that he and other authors have went down is about bread and flour and wheat and kind
Hmm.
of the history of what happens here. And it came sort of at the same time as I would have friends say things to me after they came back from a European trip, like why it might be as simple as why does the bread taste better in Europe?
Yeah. Or I don't have
Or
digestion issues
or
or
yeah, why I can eat bread in Europe, but I can't eat bread here. Like what is going on? And so you can go into this whole rabbit hole about vitamin D fortification and bleaching of flour and all of that. So at that time, I took students on a tour of a farm about 40 miles west of where I sit here in central Iowa, a guy that had started growing organic crops back in the 90s, but then put in a mill. And she's like,
okay.
my wife said, buy some flour. And so, yeah, I'm lucky enough to be married to somebody that bakes. And
Yeah. That's super lucky. I think
yeah,
that's going to be more of a selection going forward for you know Couples.
Yeah, maybe so.
Are you a baker?
But anyway, it's just good. And but yeah, he cleans the
Okay.
wheat, takes it through a mill, puts it in a bag, and I buy it. Um,
Yeah.
I haven't talked to you about this because I think the last time we spoke about it, not the last time we spoke, but you were just getting your own milling thing going, but you had like a chef that was engaged. You want to bring our
Yes.
audience up to speed on that? And yeah, let's talk
Yes.
about really good bread.
Absolutely. And I'll tell you, it's when I look at all the things we're doing today, like that's one of the most exciting and actually the fastest growing parts of our business. And I love it because it emphasizes quality. It's connecting producer and consumer. It's allowed us to be a manufacturer in that business and have job development here. I consider all this, rural development, adding margin to farmers, helping people, consumers think differently about producers that we're not allowed to get them. And anyway, it ties all those components together. And um, so Grayson Gill, he and I came together. He was actually in New Orleans at the time and a baker. And if you look up our video online, you're going to hear all this said much more eloquently by him. But Chisholm Trail Milling is that business. And he had a couple stone mills at his bakery in New Orleans. And he was actually buying some wheat berries, as as bakers call them, but, wheat kernels from Oklahoma. He was trying to find, a good source of high quality. And anyway, long story short, it's like, well, wouldn't it make more sense to have the mill back here where the grain is grown? And I, at that time, already had a lot of the supply chain established. So we were able really just to kind of bolt it on, add it on. We were already, sourcing the grain, segregating by variety from the field through the supply chain, able to bag it, clean it, bag it, ship it, So we got that mill up and running in like August of 2021. We literally had a U-Haul van and we flew a couple of our guys out to New Orleans. They loaded up that U-Haul van and, and drove the mills back here to Enid. Um, but you do what you do what you got to do. But I'll tell you, in Grayson, I have to give him credit because, I wasn't thinking about all of this and stone milling versus more modern, hammer milling and all that. But it's truly really kind of going back to the old days of how milling started. And it's a slower process. There's less heat involved. The stones help, keep the essential oils in the grain, and we do whole grain, so the germ and the endosperm, everything stays in it, and it's exactly what you described. So, we're sourcing wheat from the producers, and we keep everything single variety. There's no blending, mixing, matching of any sort. And there's variations year to year in even a variety because of the weather elements, but that's kind of the beauty of it too, and trying to get our consumers to appreciate those variances because it is natural. But we're harvesting the wheat, mechanically cleaning it just to take chaff and things out, and
Mhm.
then we mill it and we put it in a bag, and that is it. I think that over time, we in this country have thought about something having shelf life is not a good thing because we want it to be able to last. Well, I think completely opposite to that now, and I think much more of the country is like, no, you want things to have a shelf life. Like you want them to go bad at some point in time because that probably means there's not a lot of additives and stabilizers to keep it fresh or keep it in a certain form. So so
Yeah,
that's truly what we're doing.
it's not like there's a grand conspiracy or whatever.
Yeah.
A grocery store doesn't want a loaf of bread to go bad
Sure. Yeah. If you're yeah.
quickly, and that's understandable. But as a result, the highly processed stuff, yeah, I mean, they add
Yeah.
sugar to the
Yeah.
loaf, probably for
Sure.
part of it is preservation, part of it
Yeah.
is when they do taste panels, people like
Right.
sugar, but
That's what they like. Yep.
is that
Yeah.
what you should be eating for bread? Probably not.
Right. Right. And it's not to say that all the innovation. I mean, we obviously supply large scale flour mills from our grain elevator. I mean, our stone mill is a drop in the bucket compared to what scale that modern agriculture is today. And so, we stay relevant in our area. And maybe over time we're not really in the commodity market anymore on from our elevator perspective, and it's all specialty contracted stuff, including wheat, including corn, beans, everything. But that we have a destination for it other than just commodity. But, we're still developing relationships with our growers in our area and establishing our business. And, it does still give us, we're in the markets every day. So, so we're still in the commodity business. And there's nothing wrong with that, right? I understand it. And when we really think about how ag where we are today has developed over these years, you know, it is, kind of World War II, post World War II of, getting more of America being able to produce and sustain the troops overseas and how many decades we were trying to dial that in and make it to where agriculture was not as, local, regional, but was truly a national system. You think about like our logistics and ability to store grain is way beyond what Brazil is able to do now, and they're going to catch up. But that's one of their biggest hindrances to being able to compete even more on the global stage with us is just logistics and infrastructure. Well, the U.S. has done that in a huge way, and in the 70s and 80s, and we've become extremely efficient at everything. Well, now, like a lot of trends, they come full circle, and we don't want stuff that's just mass produced and has no, expiration date essentially. And I think we all begin to realize that some of that is, has caused, or been the cause when, it's the main thing we consume with all of that, of heart disease and too much sodium consumption, and all of these things actually, have made the health country less healthy. And it's no one's fault. It's just where we're at. So we're really trying to take that angle of, producing a wholesome product, which is what producers do produce. It's not agriculture's, a lot of consumers may think that agriculture is the reason. It's not. It's how it's processed in between to get to them. So we're really trying to tell that story, and we can keep it simple because the processes that we're undergoing with these crops is very simple. And that's the point of no additives and being able to build these pure ingredient products.
So you mentioned that Chisholm Trail Milling is one of the fastest growing parts of your conglomerate, Brady.
Hmm.
What can you provide us some examples of who the buyers are? Is it other chefs
Oh
like your
yeah.
co-founder for that business, or what? Yeah, what does your customer base look like?
Yes. So, our main customer base are bakeries. And, there are bakeries just blowing up all over the country. And I'm talking about like really small businesses, and that's so we're not even trying to hit major grocery stores. I mean, there's consolidation in that sector as well, but we're not trying to hit the major retailers and grocery stores and all that. We're going directly to bakeries. I mean, that's probably our number one focus. Another thing that is fascinating that's happening right now is in all of these small towns and suburbs outside of large cities are mercantile stores and just local, fresh, you know, doesn't all have to be organic or not, but just, essentially what it is, it's taking the farmer's market from just a weekend point of purchase to being able to go there all the time, like it is a grocery store. So it's like neighborhood grocery stores or neighborhood mercantile stores that are essentially farmers markets open all the time. Those are, in addition to like bakeries as well as restaurants. And, we're seeing a lot more restaurants kind of embrace the farm to table side of things and preparing stuff from scratch because, let's all be honest, it tastes different. I mean, when you do fresh bread and also from fresh milled whole grain, I mean, it's so much different. So the places that are kind of higher end that are really focusing on customers that are looking for that and want to have an experience and want to hear about the story and appreciate where how it got there, essentially, the ingredients and how it was prepared and that know those differences. Um, that's our target. So restaurants, bakeries that are doing things, in these communities and the sourdough. I mean, it's a movement. Sourdough is a movement and it has taken this country by storm. We recently had our governor. Oh, there you go.
This is
Yeah,
a loaf of sourdough made by the girlfriend of a guy who works for me.
I
And
see. Okay.
yeah,
Yeah.
so she,
Yeah.
yeah, and it
I mean,
is really good.
yeah, any token of appreciation you're trying to give someone these days, it's like give him a loaf of sourdough or a starter that's, been around for generations. Um, Even our governor, I had mentioned before, but he visited our flour mill recently, and it's like small business, it's manufacturing, it's value added processing, and I hate to even use the word processing because this really isn't, but it's just, value added ingredient creation. And, he took his flour back to the governor's mansion and showed his sourdough that he made. And so, and it's fun communication in a world that, seems to be so chaotic that we can talk about these fresh ingredients and have fun with it and it's healthier, et cetera. So we're really, embracing that all throughout our supply chain.
Well, maybe skipping from one agricultural product to the other, but staying on the same theme of local supply chains. You are a beef producer,
Yes.
and you produce a lot of things. Beef is one of them.
Hmm.
At your brewery, I brought a
Hmm.
group of students a few years ago, and so we sampled what was some very high quality beer and some
Yep.
ribeye steaks from your beef.
Yes.
And so yeah, when we you were talking about the Maha movement, I've tried to make this point with students that new food pyramid. There's a
Hmm.
steak in the most prominent part of that
Yeah.
thing. And I mean, it's been
Meats at the top.
2018, 19 when we had alternative proteins. We're going to put beef out of business, which I never thought was going to happen, but still, that was
Right.
a lot of the rhetoric. Um,
Hmm.
so, what's been your experience kind of on the animal protein side of things and building localized distribution and supply chains for that? And how do you think about that moving forward? Because if processing wheat is complicated, processing and distributing meat, all that much
Is
more.
even harder. That's right. Because number one, you're dealing with a live animal. And it just takes time. It takes, and you can't store it necessarily. You can, but we'll get into that in a minute. But and yeah, and it takes so much time and dollars, especially nowadays, to be able to raise, and time is money, obviously, but 3 years from beginning to end, it's just, and the dollars involved. So yeah, the animal protein side is interesting, and I say that Beyond Beef because we not to be confused with Beyond Meat, by the way, for that. But in addition to beef, because of course we're in an area that's high concentration of beef cattle. But just yesterday as well, I was with one of our pork producers, and he's doing eggs as well. But he does quite a few hogs, and we look at this entire category and just whatever it is you want to raise. I mean, heck, we saw this in China, Kevin, when we traveled together, a lot of backyard farms and things like that. And I think that that's really coming to this country, where people are able to do things. And this producer in particular is really interesting. He said it's extremely hard for him. And I'll tell you, this is off topic maybe, but not so much. But overall, when I look at American agriculture, I think we're going to start evolving back to a model of smaller farms that are more specialized than we are larger farms that are continuing to consolidate. And that's going to continue to happen at a certain end of this chain. Um, and I think it's better actually, if we're hoping for more young people that haven't inherited all the land and such to be able to get into agriculture. Otherwise, you can't. You cannot go out and start a farm today, if even if you wanted to. Just the capital cost of land, and even if you're renting and equipment and all the things as we know, but that is a commodity model. There's another model that can work. We just haven't even talked about it in decades. But I think there's a model where, and this producer was one of them. He has 350 acres in Oklahoma. I mean, we're not talking about California, we're talking about Oklahoma. And, he has all different types of animal protein. He has beef cattle, he has hogs, he's got chickens, he's doing, and so, he's looking at some specialty items. And that's where really our whole supply chain becomes a conversation piece for those producers because they have interest to do these things, but they have to have an outlet. And it's really hard for them while they're busy doing production and focusing on that to be able to get it to the market and store it and figure out all the infrastructure that goes into place. So, um, so that's where we focus. So let's talk specifically about the meat sector. So during COVID, when supply chains shut down, everybody began to think differently about meat and about local processing and the availability of it. And, we've long talked about the major packers and the consolidation in that sector, and they don't give fair pricing to farmers, and then et cetera, et cetera. If people think that that's an issue, there's another way to approach it as opposed to try and penalize them or break up the monopoly or what oligopoly is to be let's put some entrepreneurship into place and build models that can go against that as opposed to just waiting for the government to stay and be involved. And that's what we're doing. One thing though I quickly realized too, feeding out our own cattle, trying to get it to market is that it is really complicated. It takes a lot of capital because, you raise those animals, you process the beef, and You've got to have a processor locally that, you could do it at a state level licensing to be able to distribute around the state. But if you want to go across state lines, it has to be USDA. If you're going to go talk to a restaurant, they prefer it be USDA because that's what they're used to from the commodity beef channel. And then how do you get it to them? Are you going to throw it in the back of your vehicle and drive down? Well, that doesn't make them feel very good if it's thawed because it's. So all of this infrastructure post, the animal and processing, um, that, it doesn't seem like a real attractive investment because it just doesn't sound as fun as ag tech and other things. But it's just basic stuff that, again, I saw in China as not having enough of that we were investing in to build the supply chain. It's the same thing here when you look at a local supply chain. So number one, just processing capacity, especially a processor that has USDA certification, all that. Um, Number two, cold storage. We recently invested in a large distribution center here in Enid that has a large freezer. And just now I feel like it's really beginning to catch on because all these smaller farms, their kids coming back, they're starting a brand, they want to do their local pork and beef and poultry, but they quickly realize that the processor doesn't want to keep all of your frozen beef in his freezer because he didn't have enough freezer space. Your garage is full of freezers that you're putting stuff in. Then you have an electricity outage in the country and all your meat goes bad. So we're renting out cold storage space and we have a refrigerated truck and we can help move things around. And so, you know, when I came back here, yes, I started doing all the cattle stuff, but I'm really shifting now more to investing in this, what I call critical infrastructure to make this supply chain a reality. And instead of raising more of my own beef, actually working with these other producers and spending my resources on investing in these critical infrastructure items to help get more local beef to market, local pork to market, local poultry to market in a meaningful way. So we're not just supplying, say, a local farmer's market, but we can make an actual dent in the supply chain and maybe compete with the larger scale um, meat packers.
Yeah, and if you've talked about things that cost a lot, but cold storage, yeah, it's infrastructure, but it's
Yep.
expensive. It takes maintenance. There are
Yep.
tricks to it.
Yes.
How do you think about yeah, you talk about the processing step of that as being a bottleneck, and it is. Uh, a friend and his wife are scaling a grass-fed direct-to-consumer beef business, Grandview
Hmm.
Beef. And this has been a few years ago, and they're still quite small. This year they'll harvest maybe 150 head or something like that.
Yeah.
But I asked her,
That's decent
uh,
though. Yeah.
yeah, a few years ago, have you ever thought about, from a futuristic perspective, doing your own processing?
Hmm.
And she said, if you would have asked me when we started, it would be like, no, it's
Absolutely not. Yeah.
dirty job, very difficult. But with it being a bottleneck, at some point you get to a scale where it probably
Hmm.
does make sense. Now, maybe it's not 150 head,
Right.
but it's not at the scale that the large packing houses are either.
Yeah.
Anyway, what's your view of kind of that processing step and what we need to do? Government money, at least here
Right.
in the state of Iowa, went into trying at least to create more local processing after the pandemic
Mhm. Yep.
disasters
Same
that
here.
happened. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Having come from the world of actually being around some of the larger scale and now being back, it's good to see both because I can also say that we blame and point the finger a lot at the big packers, but they've done a lot of great things for our industry. I mean, and continue to, right? I mean, they've met the standard of increasing, requirements by consumers and health and environmental and all these things that are enormously expensive investments on water treatment and wastewater
Oh, the efficiency they
and
bring to the industry
efficiency. Yes.
is just breathtaking. I
Right.
mean, your
Yeah.
facility, your chicken processing facility in China that I visited
Oh yeah.
for OSI,
Yeah.
that was impressive, as impressive of a tour as I've had.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean it's and I was thankful to have spent a lot of time around that and be able to see it, and so I this whole conversation I don't want to get it confused with thinking that large scale corporate agriculture is a bad thing because they've done a lot of great things for the industry, right? I mean, you think about the amount of beef and pork because of this large scale industry that they've been able to put on the table of Americans to increase the protein intake without increasing the price in a significant way. It's because of scale. It's because of efficiency. It's because of all the things they've invested. It's the same thing with flour. The scale that we have and the shelf life and all that has taken so much cost out of the supply chain and makes everything more reachable and accessible by consumers that has helped build our country and, our vibrancy for decades. So I don't want to confuse that with what we're talking about. But, I just see a niche developing and, we've consolidated so much that I see that there's a large gap where a lot of these rural areas are dying, frankly, from population and lack of investment and lack of innovation and entrepreneurship and small business. And you know, that's why I'm doing what I'm doing. And, I think it's about, trying to develop rural areas. But then I think there's an opportunity where there's a win-win here, where we're meeting them where they are as well and trying to, develop out this piece of it. But yeah, cold storage, all this critical infrastructure, really, I mean, it doesn't exist in these rural areas. So the packers, we have a few local packers, but a lot of them are custom because they're processing deer and cattle, and it's for their families and neighbors, and it says not for sale on it. And I get it, because if you do that, you have the health inspectors coming all the time, and you're trying to keep the labor, and then there's wastewater requirements and it's expensive, and it's just being an entrepreneur and building a business from scratch. I mean, I've done it several times, but it's extremely hard, especially when there's heavy regulation around things that, probably should be because it's food safety, but it's difficult. And the processing industry is uh, a key bottleneck but it's not an obvious one to figure out either.
Yeah, there's a cooperative direct-to-consumer business here in Iowa called Berkwood Farms, and so Berkshire
Mhm.
pork. And
Oh yeah.
I'm going to
Hmm.
forget, but it's like 70 farms or something like that go together. But they
Yep.
built a specialty processing facility that is just for pigs. So it's not like a small town locker because they don't have to do the deer and the beef and the
Different
lamb and
animal.
the
Yeah.
pork and all that stuff. And you
Hmm.
do that, and all of a sudden you can have a 5 day a week, um,
Yep.
one shift, maybe two, but that brings reasonable efficiency for their
Hmm.
supply chain at least, so that they're
Yep.
not completely out of whack. And you have to wonder how
Yep.
many different ways a model that takes that at least as inspiration can be applied.
Yeah. I do. I think that is an opportunity. And I think that, there's a lot of cooperatives in the US and a lot of industries, but there's not in this, right? There's
Mhm.
not in the meat packing side. And we see it more in grain and dairy and all the things. But I do see that local producers, I mean, isn't sustainable beef kind of set up that way as well? That's,
I think so.
so I do see that where there's producers that have the supply and they need another option because I mean, let's face it, those plants are very expensive to invest in if done right and have some scale. You got to have the animals secured, to be able to have the processing at high utilization. And so I think we're going to see an emergence of more cooperatives in animal protein.
Well, and it brings back a flashback to my 1990s career when we were doing some stuff in specialty grains, which,
Hmm.
without naming names, some very large grain processors did not like. And I didn't at that point. I was so green. I didn't like get it. It's like, why are you so
Yeah,
mad at us when we are just a tiny speck? But then as you learn about it, it's like, okay, we are taking supply out of the system that they can't bid for. Like it doesn't
that's right.
matter. They can't
Yeah,
outbid somebody because it's tied
right.
to a different supply chain. But
Sure.
again, from a producer perspective,
Yeah,
is that a bad thing? No.
right.
But
Well, and
they
I'm I've had my own experiences with people trying to stop what I'm doing, and it's but there's a time when well, of course, it's surprising and it's discouraging. But to be honest, at this point now, it's happened to me enough times actually that it's turned into motivation, and it only drives me more because it just shows where the need is. So, but
did it surprise you? When it anyway, there are different instances of it happening. But in 1999, I'm called up to a headquarters of a large agribusiness that everybody would recognize the name of, but I'll leave
Hmm.
that aside. And they more or less say, we know everything you're doing. We're going to copy it. It could save us some time if you sell us your business, but we're not going to pay you very much. Like, what do you think? It's like, I'm sitting there thinking, what did I do?
Yeah,
But anyway, it's not that I'm unrealistic or kumbaya about
yeah,
competition, and I
right.
appreciate competition competing at least for my dollars.
Yeah,
But it was still like, oh my gosh, goodness, the status quo fights hard to keep
100%.
things the way it is.
Yes. Yeah. This is probably a whole conversation that I could have, but and if there's people here that are thinking about moving back to their community and do it for sure, but just be ready because there's when you have traditional ag communities and even though people will talk about that they want change and they want to improve and modernize or update and they want competition and new ideas, you will be surprised at how many of them actually don't. And when you start introducing those things and pushing and asking the right questions, you get pushback. But you just need to kind of go into it expecting it. And, you know, sometimes you think your own community will be the most support for you, but it's actually the opposite can be. But it's worth the fight. So,
Well, zooming back to part of our initial way that we met, Brady, when you were at OSI and living in Hong Kong, and I uh, was fortunate enough to get engaged with a project with OSI in
mhm.
China. Like 2013, just things were so optimistic between the United States and China. And I don't necessarily want to take this down a political angle, but
Mhm.
I wondered how you think about China from a geopolitical agricultural perspective and about its place in agriculture, about the relationship between the United States and China in the
Yeah.
medium or long term, at least.
Yeah, it's a good question and something I do think about often. And it may also be worth just telling how I got interested in China. And it was all the way back in 2001. And I did an internship in DC and I was at OSU and between my freshman and sophomore year and interned with Don Nichols up there, Senator Nichols. And I was able to go to one of the hearings about Trade Promotion Authority and the U.S. Trade Representative Robert Zoellick at that time, who I met 10 years later in Washington, D.C. And I told him my story. I was just thinking
I have
back
met
to,
him as well. Great guy.
yeah, to the very beginning and took a picture. It was just, but for me, it was a real moment. Because it took me back to that hearing where he was talking about Trade Promotion Authority, and that was the year of China acceding to the World Trade Organization. So that's the first time I ever thought about Asia and China. I'm from small town Oklahoma. Our family had no connection to Asia, but I began to think about, okay, this economy is going to be very important for agriculture, the world, and all the things. So I started pursuing a career there, and yeah, since I moved to Asia. I mean, I'd interned in Korea and Thailand before that, but then I moved to Asia in 2004. And those next 10 years, I mean, it was so optimistic. I mean, things could not get done fast enough. Um, and now there's just so much has happened since then, and especially in these last couple of years, but even before that, it's just it's hard to believe that the prior experience was a reality and how much it's changed. And China's mature, emerging and maturing in certain ways, and they're now introduced now biotech is okay, and and so, that's part of their evolution. And, it's going to continue to be tenuous, I think, with the United States, no matter what administration's involved, because China now has more to protect from intellectual property, from local manufacturing and expertise and all the things that they've been built from, a massive transfer of knowledge and investment and from the Western world into China as a low-cost manufacturer to export. Um, Now, it's built large companies that are global, real global competitive concerns that, are supplying both the Chinese market, other Asian markets, and the West as well can still, but over time it's going to be more about just the maturation of, the Chinese economy and their borders and all the things we see playing out. And, I think it's going to continue to be a relationship that is a must have, but it's going to be hard to politically to continue to navigate the different rub points. But agriculture is always something that China, with their population and that region and limited arable land, that is going to be an opportunity for the United States. But it's going to be more complicated, I think, to figure out, both because of that bilateral relationship, but then also the competitiveness of Brazil and their export ability and willingness to have Chinese investment
Yeah.
domestically, in their markets where we're not as, attuned to that anymore.
Well, Brady, this podcast is about how entrepreneurs like you make decisions. So I, by tradition, end up asking for kind of feedback on specific decisions that you have made that in hindsight ended up being important. So a bit of a speed round. So the first one I ask is, what's an example of a practical decision you've made that in hindsight was important?
Oh, so many. Um, and I know you sent me these in advance, and I just start thinking about, being able to pick one. I would probably say, and we've spoken a lot about this just from accounting and finance and organization of that part of a business as an entrepreneur, and how much you sometimes want to ignore it and just continue to fight out there in the front lines and build your business. But you've got to get your accounting and all the systems and processes and linkage in place. And I feel like there was a point where I was continuing to try and hire people that I didn't have the proper oversight and knowledge, even, let's face it, of how to be oversight to them, to really bring on board a group that has completely helped me to clean up and turn around that part of my business and get on track. And it requires a little bit more investment, and you're always not always wanting to do that, and it's hard to trust, especially someone who's not who's outside. But it's probably one of the most important decisions that I've made to be able to keep growing and to get my house in order.
Yeah, just the different you have different enterprises, right? With each with its
Yeah.
own set of books.
Yeah.
Any like practical software tips or anything, we live in a world of QuickBooks, which
Right.
is okay. My sort of take, I can tie my accountant into it so they can try to clean up my mistakes.
Yes. Exactly.
But
Yes.
yeah, yeah, any practical tips for, yeah, you talked about the people element of it, getting the right
Yeah.
people.
So, it's interesting because in this business, and when I started to set these businesses up, I created a different business, a different LLC, and of course, if you talk to an attorney, he's going to tell you that's probably a good idea because, just in case something happens, you've got a separate entity that is operating. But the other side of that, and you're always in business balancing the risk of, well, risk itself of liability, but also, simplicity and efficiency. It's always those two trade-offs, right? So I create all these LLCs. Um, they have different, they all have different books, just like you said. They have a different FEIN, they have different payroll, they have, so is all of it worth the unknown liability risk? And, it's hard to say. You just have to kind of make a judgment call. So I have all these LLCs, and then, recently I did create that Sidwell Enterprises as kind of a holding company. And I'm not there yet, but my plan is, instead of operating these all as all these separate entities, to be able to kind of have some, more holdco, group style of operation while trying to have these separation of liability. But it adds so much complication. If I had one payroll and one FEIN and, one insurance policy, but it doesn't work that way. So, but, I also didn't create all this in the very beginning with the plan of what I was going to do the next 10 years completely. And, some of them I had partners with. So then you have a partnership and not just a sole member LLC. And you do have to have different books because you're sharing them with them. But, I, at the end of the day, I think, if you're trying to do different ideas, you got to balance that. But, try to keep it simple. Make sure, yes, if you are entering things, that you have somebody looking at things monthly. I think when I also began, and let's face it, if you're a farmer and that's kind of what you know and what you've grown up in, most all farmers do not do bookkeeping. They do tax planning, and there's a difference. And I didn't really understand the difference of that. And there's a lot of people that still don't really understand the difference between bookkeeping and accounting, or bookkeeping and tax prep. Farmers don't want to pay taxes at the end of the year, but you need to know where you're at month and month and month. And my number one thing is the more you're reviewing stuff, or the higher frequency at which you're reviewing things, the better. Because I've had to do it myself where you're going back trying to remember what happened a year ago or 2 years ago or 8 months ago, and it's extremely hard to do while keeping up with your day to day. So review it often, get a professional involved. When you think that you know everything and you don't need anybody else involved, you can get rid of them, but get them involved in the beginning. Let them show you, teach you, train you, help, because if you don't have an accounting background, there's differences, right? It's not just logical. And I mean, it becomes a lot more logical over time why things are done the way they're done, but it's easy to get messed up when you may try to enter something here and there. We actually have gone back to QuickBooks with most of our stuff. I started and I put this software in. I probably won't say the name of it, but they told me it was a grain accounting software, and it does. And I still use it for inventory management on grain for our USDA license at the elevator. But I don't do any of my accounting in it because you have to think about when you're picking a software, what is that software? Where did it begin? What was it designed to do? And this is a kind of a thing to mention about QuickBooks. QuickBooks, is the accounting software, but it's not good inventory software. These grain management softwares, they were there to help manage your DPR, your daily position record, but they're not accounting softwares. But they put accounting in it later, like QuickBooks put inventory in later. So just understand that, and don't assume that one system can do everything because that's not what it was designed to do. And so whatever they started as and as their main function, use them for that, but be very cautious and aware of if you're trying to add all of your business under one software, which of course you would think is most simple, but it may not be because it may be a lot harder to do either, the accounting in an inventory management software or inventory management in an accounting software.
Yeah. What's an example of a principled decision you've made that in hindsight was important?
Well, as an entrepreneur, especially when you're building things from scratch, you're going to screw up. And you're going to screw up often sometimes, and depending on your customer base, they could get really upset about it, and it's your fault, and maybe you argue that it's not your fault, and this is life in general, but especially as an entrepreneur with a young company or even a company now like myself that's 10 years older, that has made a mistake. And sometimes you just gotta, admit well, not sometimes. If you made a mistake, you gotta admit your mistake and you gotta make it right. And so I've had to do that on a number of occasions, and it really hurts at the time. And you even begin to think, oh, if that's what it's going to cost me, maybe I could slip by and not have to, settle up to some difference or make something right, or you know, truly apologize to someone, but you have to. And I've had to do it a number of times. And there's a lot of humility in this business. And, if you think you're going to own your business and become a billionaire overnight, I can tell you anybody that has a large company, multi-million, whatever, they've made a lot of mistakes. They've had to eat their words many times. They've had some moments where actually they've probably had a lot of moments where they thought about just giving up. They've had pressure from their spouses and friends and others and banks, and none of that comes without all of that. And I'm not sure any new entrepreneur comes in thinking that, right? Because they're gung ho, ready to go. They've been in a corporate job, now they're going to, and I've just had some real reality checks. I mean,
Well, and
so
you're in the nature of many entrepreneurs is they're drivers and they're extroverts and they're used to being right and they can
yes,
talk their way through a lot of problems.
yeah,
But yeah, my second company, Decision Commodities, not because I knew it, but because yeah, I lived through not doing it the right way.
yeah,
We had a rule eventually, and that was if a customer's mad about something, like as president of the company, I want to know like right away. Like
right,
if you
yes,
just had a bad phone call, if you just had a bad visit, if there's a complaint, like you tell me right now, because my method became
yeah,
I called that ticked off person right away. And
right, yeah,
and yeah, it
yeah,
hurts a little bit, but it's like, okay, Brady, I understand you're upset with this. Let's talk about this. And
Yeah.
it's way better than letting it go on trying to skirt around it or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's still hard to do. And but yeah, I mean that would be the number one, especially when you're trying to build a business because you're trying to keep building and so
What's an example of a weird or whimsical decision that you've made that in hindsight ended up being important?
yeah, I tend to make a lot of whimsical in terms of, when I see an opportunity, I kind of go for it and I don't think it through. I don't put a business plan together but at the end of the day, that's who I am, and I also have discovered that a lot and the majority of people, which is probably smarter, but they have a lot of ideas and how we're gonna, but they don't just go for it. And so, if you're really going to make change and try to disrupt, not disrupt because you just want to disrupt, but disrupt because you truly believe that if you can make a certain thing different, it's going to be better, right? That's always what we're about. Not just for the sake of disruption. And I say that because there's a lot of people that are that way too. But it's important, if you're going for something like that, sometimes you just got to go for it. I've seen so many projects and plans and people talking about things, and I mean, this area in the economic development list is full of skeletons that never got beyond a decision phase, and you just got to get going because you will never plan for everything in advance. And until you kind of get going and put boots on the ground and trucks on the road and do the things, and you gotta know what you're doing as well and make it. But the thing is, businesses are not made, from a plan. Businesses are made, you do as much planning as you can, but then you just got to get moving. And businesses are made by all the things and decisions you make daily to react to the environment. And the certainty is that it will always change and you will never fully know what it is that will make it successful until after it's happened. But you got to continue to be, able to pivot and be nimble and have a ton of grit and keep going. And that's what makes a business. It's not, a plan and because most of the things I hear about of development projects that have happened around this area, they put this huge plan together and then it got too big almost because they were trying to make it even bigger to make it more attractive to investors. And then, the interest rates change a little bit, and then the whole model's whacked, and then the whole thing just goes away. And I've heard it so many times in this area for processing plants that are going to come here and do all this for agriculture, and none of it's happened. And so I'll be the first to admit that, I do some stuff head first and I should probably do more planning and I need to get more people on my team to help balance that out. But you got to go for it. I mean, and so a
I
lot of
think
stuff that I do is based on that, just to
I do think is the
go for
nature of entrepreneurial and innovative things. The chapter of the book that this podcast is meant to advocate for, one of the chapters is on Walt Disney and the way that he made decisions. And one of the points in that chapter is exactly what you make, Brady. And that's that when you're doing new things, yeah, you can try to plan a little bit, but the more important thing is to get going and then adjust, which is what Disney was a real paragon of that. Anyway, I've had that chapter reviewed by an editor who actually used to work for Disney. And she came back to me. It was just like, Kevin, do you realize how many books there are on how to plan? And like your chapter says, that's not it.
yeah,
So that makes it unique.
yeah.
Well, Brady, you've talked about a lot of things. I'll maybe conclude today's conversation by asking you if you have any parting advice for aspiring entrepreneurs. And I think some of the many of the things that you've touched on, and you touched on how important entrepreneurs, agricultural entrepreneurs doing their thing in rural communities is going to be to the vibrancy of those communities. And I can't characterize any of the entrepreneurs that sit in classes or listen to this podcast, but if there's the biggest group of any, it is those that do aspire to go back to rural communities.
Hmm.
And in the beginning, it might be just like, how do I make a living, or
Hmm.
without just getting more acres or whatever. But it's a big group, so uh, that's at least a start. But what advice do you have for them? What further advice do you have? I think you've given a lot of good tips.
Yeah. Well, I'm one of you. And I will say that agriculture is in our blood, and it's crazy. It's like sometimes it doesn't even make sense to be in production agriculture, but we all want to be, and we all want to buy more land. You know what I mean? I mean, it is, if you've really grown up in it, it's just amazing how hard it is to break that. And we don't want, I say we, but that's a good thing. That's something to be proud of. But we have to, and you can, but you have to do things differently. I mean, look at the conversation now on the national stage. It's like we're waiting for the next farm bill and government handout to be sent. I mean, we gotta, this cannot be our future, Kevin. It's waiting on policy to determine our future. And so, be innovative, and rural communities need you. I'm very passionate about this, and you know, you're going to lead by example and going back to your rural area, and you'll find that there's actually a lot of people I find in big cities that want to experience more. And this is probably like a Yellowstone movement or whatever, but let's embrace it. Like, let's share more of when these consumers and people in urban areas that are big voters that, we need to be able to shape policy for sure. But they want to know what you're doing and see these things. And so, you provide the inspiration for that, and don't be afraid to kind of share that with them. But, agriculture's in our blood. And even if you think that, what your parents are doing and the way they set up their operation, and it may or may not be exactly what you want to do. It is for some, but you may not be able to make a living off of it. If your parents are, and you and your wife, and you need health insurance and all of the things, but there's huge opportunity and needs in agriculture to be able to tweak and change. And so if you have an idea, put it into play. One thing I do want to say is that bigger is not always better. And you've already heard that on this podcast, but I really believe that there is, and we all kind of say, well, how much land do you have? How big is your tractor? How many bushels or total revenue did you sell? How many cattle do you have? Like, what I also learned is like the real bragging rights are how much profit did you make, Um, and, I also see a lot of young entrepreneurs that come back and they try to be as big as possible, but they don't spend time with their family because they're always running. And, I grew up in that environment as well. And that's part of entrepreneurship and farming. Of course, you got to be there when you have to make hay when the sun shines. But, there's a lot of, entrepreneurial ideas that are yet to be made and implemented in agriculture. Kevin, we were talking about how hard ag tech is to invest in. Because we've seen so much money that had no idea about agriculture chasing ideas that they thought farmers needed or had to have that would make their lives easier without actually knowing anything about what farmers do and
Gonna say
how
if they would have talked to just a couple
practical.
farmers, they probably would have
Yeah.
learned otherwise.
So that is a huge opportunity, though, for young people that are out there and have interest in innovative and new ideas, and but also a base and understanding of how things work practically, and what the challenges are never what a lot of investors think they are, in ag tech. But there's an opportunity where, I feel like a lot of the ag tech investment out there and food tech and other things, it's had a huge reality check in these last several years. And I think there's going to be a whole emergence of that category investing in ag tech to come and entrepreneurs to come, that they need to be much more informed of how things happen on the ground. And that's a huge opportunity for young people to be able to, I think, be able to access more attention from that segment. But I heard another guy say recently, I think Ray Dalio, but don't think about how you're going to sell your company. If you're going to start a company, I mean, of course you want to think about the exit, and if you have investors, you have to. I understand, but do things that you're passionate about, because it's always going to take longer. It's always going to be more expensive. It's always going to require more grit and just be personal than you think it will be when you're trying to create an idea. And it's not just about having an idea and having it half baked and then trying to flip it, and you might, and sometimes that works out, but a lot of times, you've got to work in it. And I'll tell you, I've had an experience here recently where I had a whole team of people, and a couple managers just walked out. I mean, it's at our brewery, but I was the bartender this weekend, actually, or we would have been closed. So, it just, and this is, well, the brewery's 7 years this, or last month, March was 7 years. You'd think that, it would all be in place by now, but, it's just, markets are dynamic and businesses are dynamic and, you may have to stick with something. So don't just do it because you think it could sell. Do it because you're passionate about it and you really see a need and, have grit and you're going to get a lot of pushback. You should expect it. And when it's really hard to get pushback is when it's from the people that you thought would care and support you most. But that can be a good thing too. But, you just got to be prepared for it. But, you know, it's, it's noble to want to come back to your community and make an impact. And, even if your other friends are working at big companies and have big salaries and everything else, and I can tell you, if I would have not done all this entrepreneurship 10 years ago, and especially given what the stock market's done, I would have a lot more money, like a lot more money, and a lot less gray hair. But, you know, I mean, at the end of the day, I could, but what is that to say? I mean, I want to make an impact, and rural America and rural agriculture in your rural communities, need you now more than ever. And having young people coming back and excited about the future, even when people are extremely negative, actually, about the present, that's what makes us, that's what makes it such an exciting thing is we have young people that want to change and improve and make things better. So it's a noble cause. Stick with it. And, the most defining moments of your life and your character are going to be the time when you're most under fire, when when you think you can't continue and all of these things. And that's when, you gain definition about what life's really about and everything else. So, and what business is about. And I've had those moments, here in the last couple of years, interest rates have doubled, insurance has gone sky high. We had a tragic loss of a COO that I never expected would have, and it's just all these things. And I thought I was bigger, better, smarter, and past, and you're not, and it'll come and get you. But that's when you can test your resolve and double down and go for it. So. Try to really make an impact on your community. I mean, you know it better than anybody else, and there's a real opportunity. And I think more than now than ever, like investors and consumers, they're listening, and we have such an opportunity in American agriculture to, dominate the world and our communities and our consumers, and um, you know, go for it.
Well, you've told me that both your governor and lieutenant governor have stopped by in fairly recent memory. I don't think they're doing it because you're on a main thoroughfare. They're
That's right. Yeah, it was definitely it. They didn't take the wrong turn.
well, blood brother Brady.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you for
Hey,
everything you
one
do.
one one other thing, just real quick, is the I mean the most amazing opportunity now for rural areas, which, there's a lot of businesses out here too that are not just about agriculture. So if you're in agriculture, but you have ideas about other industries that would work in rural areas, go for it because there's a lot of this part of the opportunities that no one else is thinking about because it's become so consolidated, it's larger scale. So there's a whole small, medium-sized things that are happening that, you can capture. I never thought I'd be in the distribution business and, it all ties together. Every company is interacting and dealing with one another, but, don't just limit to production agriculture. Think about other things in your community that can make it better. But AI is such an opportunity for us small businesses. I was talking to a guy today. He's like, "Oh, I need to update my will and or get a will. I need to contact this attorney." I'm like, "No, you don't. Just knock out a base thing. You can always update it later." But that's never existed. I mean, coming up with an employee handbook or a contract with a farmer, or, and some of that stuff exists, but it's taken advantage away from just being a huge company with all of the resources and staffing and all that personnel that you may can't afford, especially when you're starting out. Like AI is a huge opportunity
A
to be able to help
farmer friend of
democratize
mine,
information.
a farmer friend of mine, when he has road time, is talking to Grok about
Hmm.
agronomic issues. He's raising shrimp. Anyway, he's having deep production
Wow.
and
Yeah.
scientific conversations with Grok, who's learning along with him. And
Right.
yeah, what
I
a
mean,
thing.
and it's just the information at your fingertips. Like I have people like, what are you, and especially when you're trying to price what you're doing, like, what do you charge for freezer rates per pallet? I don't know. I mean, there's no one else here doing what we're doing at all. But you can ask as a reference, and you don't take it as as the truth always. But man, to have somebody like that that's like an advisor to you, that has that information and can make things quicker and be able to knock out and create documentation that you need in your business that is professional. And I mean, it is such a great opportunity for young people and for small businesses and in agriculture and rural communities. So I would just get to know it as much as you can, and as a small business, as a big business, but it's really a great opportunity for small entrepreneurs, people starting with ideas. And
Well, I follow you on LinkedIn, but I'm not very good at social media. But what other ways do you suggest that those that are interested in following you do that, Brady?
well, you have to come to Enid.
Of
Like,
course.
let's do this
I
in
advise it.
person
I
now.
advise it.
Yeah, but seriously, I love showing our supply chain and our facilities and inspiring hopefully ideas from people. Take a road trip, come down. We have Airbnbs, one on the farm. I talked about people in the cities wanting to experience it. Like we have Airbnbs, one above the brewery, one at the farm. But yeah, LinkedIn, Facebook, we have pages for all of our companies. If you just go to my Facebook page, I have like all my companies linked, and then you can find the Facebook pages there. Instagram, I'm like a little older for Instagram, but um, a lot of of course, younger people are on it, and so we try to be on all platforms and tell our story, and that's what you have to do too in your business is tell your story. But yeah, LinkedIn, and then the socials, but come see us.
And I'll come down soon. Thank you, Brady.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Gavin.